Great. I can see people coming in to the session. Wonderful. We'll wait for those numbers just to come in for just a minute, and then I'll start with our welcoming remarks, housekeeping details, etc. Okay, why don't we go ahead and kick it off? Hello and welcome to the webinar, VR Case Studies, Emerging Technologies in Counselor Education and Other Helping Professions. Thank you all for being here. My name is Elizabeth Roby. I'm an editor of the database Mindscape Commons, which is part of Coherent Digital. We are an online academic publishing group and really happy to host this webinar today, and really honored to have Drs. Wilkinson, Walsh, and Dawson on this call to have a conversation around emerging technologies in the helping professions. So as people are joining the call, I have just some quick housekeeping details before I introduce the panel and we get started. First, we will be recording this webinar and posting it to our Coherent Digital website. We will email you with the link of that recording in a few days. Also, we encourage you to use the chat box. We'll be keeping an eye on it and monitoring it throughout the hour. So if you have a question or a comment while someone is talking, please post it and we'll try to weave it right into the conversation. In fact, I think Dr. Walsh, you'd like to ask the attendees what they'd like to get out of this webinar?
Sure. And our experience is, especially with something like this, there are going to be folks who really know a whole lot about VR and AR and 360 video and want really specific information. And there's going to be other folks that are a little bit more new to the content. And so we would like to tailor this conversation, and we would like it very much to be a conversation to you and your needs. So if you've got something really specific that you're interested in or you're into, please throw it into the chat. My background and experience is in sort of the learning and kind of the neuroscience of learning side, how VR and AR and 360 video fit into that. So I can add to that. Dr. Dawson has got tremendous experience with regard to use of the technology itself and the development of technology and customizing that technology. And is very willing to share his expertise with folks. And Dr. Wilkinson, of course, and I'll let him introduce it. He's done some amazing research with regard to using and utilizing these technologies in the classroom. So anything that you're hoping to get out of that, please do throw into the chat and we'll be happy to tailor this to you.
Yeah, please do. Please use that chat function. We will be monitoring it. And thank you so much, Dr. Walsh. So before I go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists, I hope you'll allow me to take a minute to talk about Mindscape Commons, which is an online database of immersive video content for teaching and training in the helping professions. Early in my research on the use of immersive technologies, I actually came across an article in the CACREP journal, Teaching and Supervision and Counseling, by Dr. Wilkinson and his colleague, Dr. Wilkinson, was it Kathleen Vizile?
That's correct,
yeah. It was in the CACREP journal, Teaching and Supervision and Counseling, and the article is titled Counseling Students' Experiences Viewing Virtual Reality Case Studies. I found it really intriguing. And so Dr. Wilkinson at the time had created a few of these 360-degree video case studies to be viewed immersively in a headset. And he published his research, which he'll talk a little bit about today. But from there, we connected, and together we've worked to expand the number of virtual case studies into a library of video content, which is in Mindscape Commons. So very quickly, before I introduce our panelists, I just wanted to show a quick slide on Mindscape Commons. Do you see it up here? Yes, great, thank you. Okay, so just really quickly, Mindscape Commons is the first online database of immersive and interactive video content in mental health. This is our website right here. It's free to register just with an email. I encourage anybody on the call, if they're interested, to register. I will actually share this link in a follow-up email after the webinar. With the registration, you have access to a growing directory of research projects around emerging technologies and mental health, as well as links to open access 360 video content, links to Oculus content. We've provided indexing and summaries around all the content in the directory so you can really easily find what you need for teaching. And again, this is just all open access. We really hope to grow this community of people interested in this area. So we would love for you to submit information on any projects you're working on with emerging technologies and mental health. We have an entry form link on our website to fill information out on your project. I'll send you that link in our follow-up. We can create a page that details your project and research and links back out to your own website to drive traffic there. Again, we're just trying to build community around this area. With this free registration, you're also able to preview some of our membership content, which includes the VR cases we'll be talking about. We also have some interesting interactive simulations that showcase evidence-based relationship skill building techniques. We have assessment questions embedded into that video. Other 360 video, it's all about 3 to 15 minutes. It includes teaching materials and transcripts. And again, the majority of content in Mindscape can simply be viewed on a laptop. So if you're not particularly, if you're new to VR or other emerging technologies, it can just be viewed on a laptop, on a mobile phone with a cardboard device or a head-mounted device such as an Oculus. So anyway, if you're interested in like accessing all of Mindscape, we can set up a free institutional trial. But really, for right now, I just really encourage you to just register and take a look around and send us feedback. So that is it with that slide. Okay, so now can you, am I slide sharing any longer?
Nope, I think you're in good shape. We see you.
You see me. Do you see anything coming up on my screen?
Not any longer.
Great. It's just us. Okay. Okay. I just want to introduce our wonderful panelists. Dr. Tyler Wilkinson is an associate professor and coordinator of the PhD program in counselor education and supervision at Mercer University. He's based in Atlanta. He also maintains a private practice. Dr. Wilkinson has presented at numerous counseling conferences and has been published in various peer-reviewed counseling journals. His research interests include the implementation of technology in counseling and counselor ed, humanistic approaches to counseling and counselor ed, student cognitive development, ethics, and couples counseling. So welcome, Dr. Wilkinson. Dr. Michael Walsh is a clinical associate professor at the University of South Carolina Rehabilitation Counseling Program. In addition to maintaining a private practice, Dr. Walsh specializes in, as he mentioned before, learning communities and adult learning, and has delivered presentations on best practices in teaching. Dr. Walsh has served 2 terms as president of the Association for Humanistic Counseling, 2 terms on ACA's Ethics Committee, and is currently a member of ACA's Governing Council as the current parliamentarian. And finally, last but not least, Dr. Robert David Dawson, who goes by David, is also a clinical associate professor at the University of South Carolina's Rehabilitation Counseling Program. He is coordinator of the VR lab, the virtual reality lab within the School of Medicine, and co-director of South Carolina's Center for Assistive Technology in Education Research. He and his colleague, Dr. Walsh, have presented on ways to use virtual and augmented reality in counselor education, which they'll be doing here today. So thank you all so much for being here, for offering your time and talents. And I think at this point right now, Dr. Walsh, if you'd like to go ahead and kick it off.
Sure. And thanks, everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that wonderful introduction and for having us here today. We really want to have this be a conversation with you all about what you're interested in, what are your needs, what do you wonder about with regard to virtual reality. I can say that when I was first exposed to it, Dr. Dawson has a tremendous amount of experience, many years in working and in using VR. And I remember he and I talking about it, and he kept saying to me, "You got to try it. You got to try it. You got to try it." Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds good, I would say. And one day, I was walking by his office. You sit down. You got to try it. And as soon as I sat down, put on that headset, we were actually looking at brain models, and he knows what my interests are, so he knew how to suck me in. And as soon as I was in that world, I thought, wow, how amazing this would be for say an addiction student to be able to watch the onboarding of a substance and visualize how that happens. What kind of depth of understanding could we reach with these kind of immersive experiences? And he and I were like kids in a candy store. I think it was probably 2-3 hours went by, and then we realized we were both late for everything that we were supposed to do. And we realized the potential, or I realized the potential. He already knew about it. So I think that sort of wonder of how can we use these technologies to facilitate learning has really spurs me on. And so what we hope to do today is maybe ignite your curiosity a little bit. For those of you who know a lot about virtual technologies, maybe there's something really specific that we can point to. Dr. Wilkinson has, as I said, done some incredible research with the use of these technologies, and he's got some data on that he's going to share with us. Dr. Dawson's got a tremendous amount of experience, and Dr. Dawson will also, and he and I both will volunteer to consult with anybody on this call in terms of the development of your particular project. So we're happy to share what we know. As folks, and I think I can speak for Dr. Wilkinson too, as folks who are interested in humanistic approaches to learning. Boy, there's not too many things more humanistic than helping somebody to deepen the meaning that they can make of something and deepen their experiences. And sometimes I think people look at technology and think, well, that's not humanistic. But really, when it comes to making meaning of things and deepening experiences, nothing could be more humanistic than that. So with that said, what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a brief 2 seconds. I mean, this isn't going to be real long. But I wanted to share with you the specific things that we're going to be talking about today. So, what's 360 video? What does that mean? And we're hoping to share that with you. So let me bring this up real quick. Can folks see my PowerPoint?
I can see it.
Excellent. Now, this is part of an ACA presentation that we did, but I just want to share the first few slides with you, and then we can kind of move forward. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint in general, but sometimes a visual helps. We interact with the world through sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. When we're operating educationally through, hey, read an article and let's talk about this, there's somewhat of an immersive component to it, right? People are reading, people have to make some meaning of that. They have to understand that. But the real magic happens, I think, when we have conversations with others and we're able to connect with others about the meaning we make and about the meaning that they make. Learning community stands as a way to sort of bring all that together. What we thought in terms of as we developed immersive technologies is, could we deepen the experience such that those interactions, those conversations have so much more meat on them to be able to share? And so really fundamentally, and we'll go into the neuroscience of all this in a second, there is fast learning and slow learning, and I'm not going to go into this in depth, but fast learning is sort of what you learn first, right? So if you think about riding a bike, fast learning was, I've got to take my feet, off the ground, and I've got to figure out the motion and how that works. And that happens in certain areas of our brain. And it tends to happen very quickly and in a very front-loaded way in parts of our brain. And then you see that on the left, called the M1 area. And that's great. That's where initial learning starts. And if you think about, teaching people to counsel, that's how it works. They have to mimic what a good counselor looks like, sounds like. They have to watch it. And in doing so, they're able then to sort of get up on the bike, right? Take their first few strides. But if you're anything like me learning on a bike, you fell a lot of the time. And one day your brain had time to cook. Your brain had time to sort of make sense of that and start to integrate some of those things with the more of the posterior aspects of the brain. And you see that on the second slide. That's slow learning. That's when we start making meaning of things. That's when we start filing things so that we can use them really efficiently. And that's when skills really tend to grow. The amount of immersive experience we have can advance that slow learning process. Slow learning is called slow learning because it happens a little bit more slowly. The more immersive the experience, the more we can move from fast to slow learning. And really what we want counselors to experience as they learn is slow learning. We want them to be able to intentionally be able to call upon those skills. So really, when we talk about virtual reality and immersive reality, VR 360, we're looking to deepen those experiences so that we can facilitate this fast to slow learning process. And I'm happy to share this article with you. It's by Diana Cohen, 2011. Really an interesting article. But what are we talking about today? This is a brief look at my brain that was imaged very recently. No, just kidding with you. So here is 360 video, and this is an example of a 360 camera. I don't know if you can see this, but it's got a lens on one side, it's got a lens on the other. The software then stitches those images together, and so that when you are viewing a 360 video, and typically you would do this either with you've heard about cardboard. That's a cardboard device that you place your phone into, and your phone actually creates stereoscopic images either side, and the viewer allows you then to puts this in front of your eyes and allows you to experience an immersive content. So the one I think of off the top of my head is the lion experience. You're standing kind of near a tree and in a lion enclosure, and you look around you and there's a cub that's wandering around, and oh, he's right there. And you can physically turn around in the environment, and the software stitches those images together and provides you. It's less interactive, but certainly much more interactive than, say, looking at a 2D video where you have the edges of the screen. It feels like you're there. Augmented reality, on the other hand, is an overlay of virtual technologies into sort of current experiences. For those of you who are old like me and remember the movie Minority Report, there was a lot of augmented reality in that particular movie. He was moving through the environment and it would say, "Hi, Mitch, are you interested in McDonald's today? You look hungry," right? And by the way, there's a McDonald's over here. And by the way, there's a library over here. And if you look at the image we have on our screen, you can see that it's overlaying some virtual content with the actual picture content. Augmented reality is considered by many to be the future of advertising, for example. You can go, if you get interested in this, download the Google Wines That Talk. There's an app that you can download and go to the supermarket, find 19 Crimes wine, and open that app and hold your phone up to that bottle, and the bottle will talk to you. The person will come alive and will begin to speak. Imagine if you could do that with a textbook. I mean, think about the copyright stuff aside, right? If I could take a textbook, and I apologize for my puppy thought this was a great textbook and tasty, so apologize for the look of this one. Imagine if we could open this textbook and then have a graphic come up, or have an infographic, or if we're looking into the assessment cycles of the subscales of the waste. Imagine if we could see those and page through those. So augmented reality has lots and lots of applications to enrich 2D content or enrich video content. And lastly, and this is where I'll close, we talk about virtual reality, and these are headset-based experiences. I think the one you're seeing here is the Rift. I think that's a Rift S. And that is a highly immersive content. You've got controllers. This particular unit is tethered to a computer. It gives you a really rich immersive experience. There's a newer versions of this technology, the Quest and the Quest 2, which are wireless. They don't require tethering. But as such, because they don't have a big old computer with lots of memory and a graphics card backing them up, They tend to be a little bit lighter in terms of content, although that's improving as well. So I wanted to give you just a brief introduction for those of you who may be new to what we're looking at. So those are the technologies that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to close my end of the presentation and turn it over to Dr. Wilkinson, who maybe can share a little bit about his experiences with using some of these technologies. So I appreciate your attention, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Wilkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Walsh. And thank you all for being here. I find this to be a very interesting topic, and I think the way I'll structure some of this, and I do invite questions and for my panelists to respond. I think what I might do is start by talking how I found my way into this as well. Talk a little bit about the research I've done and sort of where I'm at, and maybe even talk some of the challenges that I've experienced. Because I think on one hand, I really like the idea of the way in which technology can inform pretty much anything broadly, if I'm being perfectly honest. If I wasn't doing this here, I'd probably be doing it elsewhere at home. I mean, I like to play with technology, but I've always been interested in how technology can inform the training of clinicians, counseling students broadly. I've been interested in just sort of how technology can inform and in some instances make our lives easier. When I stumbled upon virtual reality, I think my initial way in was just through the technology understanding through gaming and just being aware of what it was going on. I was also had my eye on a radar going back to augmented reality. I remember when Google Glass was really hitting the ground, and then it didn't really go anywhere. And really often thinking through how can these technologies inform counselor training. And for me, I think it's been said, one thing I've always been interested in, just as a counselor educator and as a researcher very broadly, is how do we teach students to do this very, in my opinion, odd job of counseling. It is a very unique profession in that it is in itself a unique immersive experience for the individual. And one thing I was finding when I started doing and getting into counselor education initially was I was very intrigued by, going back to the cognitive development, how our thinking changes about another individual and what does it mean to be mentally ill or better or normal, and all these interesting buzzwords that come out. And I was very curious sort of how we teach students to do that. And I love to play this game with my students. It's called What Happens to You When You Tell People What You Do. I'm sure all of you on here have stories of, oh, what do you do professionally? And there are times when I'm honest, and there are times I want to lie a little bit, because you'll get all the reactions of, oh, that's interesting, or I'm done talking to you. Or one of my favorite is this belief that I can somehow read minds as a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist or whatever word they want to use. And I find that because I find a lot of people coming into the profession and in popular culture don't fully understand what it means to be a good clinician. And I am a very humanistic in my mindset, my philosophy, my counseling theory. And so I always think a lot about the role of the counselor. And I always find that what's interesting about this profession, it is not merely an intellectual endeavor. It is a very experiential one. And I teach our practicum course a lot, which is when students get into their field experience for the very first time. And one thing I've seen just over and over and over again throughout the years is that initially the strongest reaction my students have is not, oh, I don't intellectually know what's happening, right? A lot of my students can see a clustering of symptoms and say, that kind of looks like this diagnosis. The conversations we're having are, this makes me feel a certain way. I've had students literally crying in class because they're so overwhelmed. You know, if you think about the issue of dealing with a child sexual abuse situation and trauma. And what that's led me to think through is I do think the way our training's set up is sometimes a little bit unfair, because we back end a lot of that experience. You're not getting in the hot seat, so to speak, until you're doing practicum internship, which in most programs is at the end of the program. And at that point, a lot of students are thinking about graduation. And so it's a very hard discipline to get a lot of exposure to really sort of sort through what's happening. So for me, that's kind of how I ended up doing and getting and thinking about where VR can come into play. And so, we just showed this. So through like an Oculus headset, one thing, the way I was looking at VR, because I know it's used also in a lot of clinical context, immersive, there's a lot of VR research related to the treatment of phobias through exposure in a controlled environment. And so in some ways, building off of that, I was very interested in thinking about how can we use virtual reality to get a more immersed experience for our students earlier in the program to help with the inter and intrapersonal experience of who am I, what is it like? And so the idea initially was I wanted to create these virtual micro cases, and I'll share my screen just as an example of one of the ones we have in Mindscape Commons is just this idea of how can I create this more realistic experience? And so the idea being, wanting to get this first person perspective going on for students. And so some of the challenge I faced is initially there's nothing out there. I think this is one of these fields where I'm excited to get people together to talk through it, because I think that helps generate some momentum around not just can we get the technology, but a big challenge is the stimuli on the back end isn't really to where we can do a lot of this. And this is where I think something like a Mindscape Commons is exciting, because it creates some potential in different types of things. So my initial mindset was really not to create a conversation per se, because that requires just even more technology and even artificial intelligence, I dare say. For me, I was looking at treating this as, what if we started to create a different type of case study experience? And so for training counselors and clinicians, I know a traditional way to try to expose them to some of the narrative that they might experience in session is through case studies, right? Which are typically written down in a story. And I think they get us close. But I think where I'm excited about things like virtual reality, and especially the way I'm using it's from this perspective of virtual micro cases. And so the idea being, what I have done is I've have a headset set up to a computer in a lab, and I bring students in one by one. They put the headset on, and the experience, just like that image, is an attempt to try to recreate the experiential environment. Because one thing I'm wanting them to do is not just merely read and intellectualize a case, but what's a very interesting thing, and I'll get to some of the initial findings I found, is one of the things that I think students responding to the most when I put them in this immersive experience is not, oh, this is new content, but they're seeing, these are live videos where they're seeing individuals react, emote, non-verbally respond to, look up and make eye contact. And one of the most interesting things I think we saw when we had students, because we would observe students while they were doing it, not just from what they were telling us, but after a few minutes, you see their own body language beginning to respond to the case, and that you see head nods. Well, what was very fascinating that Dr. Bazile and I saw a lot is that you would see them over time leaning forward. And it's this type of engagement, and it's that type of experience that has led me into this type of research, and I really want to continue to do. And I think that is sort of where I am kind of currently looking at this. There's a lot of different ways you can take these, take VR broadly, but with these, for me, these micro cases, I've used them and tried to think through how to use them in a lot of different contexts. So I've used it in the context of ethics, right? How would you respond and interact in this way? And so the way I've been using it is these videos I've created are only short little 3-minute vignettes. And the idea wasn't to replace a role play per se, but for the way I'm using it is to replace a case study. I'm thinking of it more as an immersive case study. And the other thing that can happen too is one of the things with these videos that we try to do is also, and there's a lot more that we could create, but we wanted to also try to maximize the amount of diversity that we were portraying in these videos. Because, one thing, and I've not studied this, but one thing I find interesting is when a student reads a case, if I'm not providing demographic information, I'm always interested in sort of what they bring to it and project on it. And so I find it very interesting. Another opportunity is you start to also incorporate all the different nuances of, if you bring in different demographics, different cultural information that comes in through these cases, that it allows the student to not just think about it, but they're starting to experience it. And so, very early on, the challenge we have had and continue to have in doing this is, again, the first challenge was just to have the content to expose. So that, to Mike's point, we were really, I spent a lot of time recording my own videos and using a camera like a 360 camera. And there's some pretty good ones out there that are relatively inexpensive, where you can do a lot of interesting things into it. And we've already started talking. I know we were talking about different ways to create videos. I've used it to even record a lecture, right? Just to see what that was like. And you can watch, the presentation from within rather than from the outside in. Mike, you mentioned earlier the idea about immersive assessments, not just AR on the textbooks, but, what would it be like if you had, like if you did a whisk and you're manipulating the blocks from in a VR headset. And I've even thought about doing interesting, in the mindset of, I know like with elementary school students, they're doing virtual field trips of, what if we did like a tour of an inpatient behavioral health and a substance use facility or a rehabilitation, how would that sort of change conversation? Because there's just a lot that students don't know. And I feel like they respond very strongly. They don't respond until they get in there. So that was one of the challenges. And I think that's a continued area of growth is, being very encouraging about the type of content that we can put out there and to create. And then the other is the one I've had too is, I had this Oculus headset, and it is great. It is tethered to a computer, and it is a very time consuming, bringing a student in, doing an immersive experience. And I think we can learn a lot from it. I think it's very rewarding. You have to have a right computer set up, and that can be a side conversation. But we've traditionally brought students into this lab we've set up. We put them into it. We have a chair set up that it is to mimic more of like a counseling type of comfortable chair. It wasn't just a wooden folding chair. We were trying to recreate, even to that point of the five senses. We're trying to maximize that. So even as they're sitting, I want them to feel as though they're sitting there. And one of the things we also did too is that before we exposed them to any stimuli, for the first time we did a desensitization kind of video. So I had created an instructional video of another doctoral student that was basically like, look up, look down, look around. Because one thing we found too is that sometimes this technology is so new, the participant gets distracted by just the newness. Is like, oh, this is neat. Look what we can do these days. And so rather than watching the case, they're just like, oh, can I see my legs? Can I see, turning all the way around, want to see exactly how immersive it is. So we tried to desensitize a little bit of that before we had them talk with us. And so that's initially what we did is, and I will be honest, I'm still learning myself of what ways can this be useful? What ways does it work? What ways does it not work? I think once we had some of these videos created, I was able to get students in and do, a lot of the early research is more qualitative. We're doing some stuff now where we're trying to get some quantitative metrics in there. I have visions of trying to immerse together, and Robert, we've talked about this sort of biofeedback and physiological markers, and using that to demonstrate that the individuals having these lived experiences alongside of it. And it really created, after we pulled them out, very rich conversations. And so I think there's this also piece of, there's the in-person reaction where the individuals are learning about themselves and how they react. And so for me, initially, it was creating content that would purposely be a little bit more emotionally arousing by design. Suicide conversations, trauma discussions, very intense anger expression, because I wanted to expose students to that level of emotionality in a controlled environment so that they can begin, in some ways, helping develop that cognitive and interpersonal awareness around what is going on. And so we found a lot of students really resonated with that experience. The thing we heard a lot too was, and I think this is where it also has potential, really asking for some of these experiences earlier on in the program. And so I think from at least the initial feedback I'm getting, students want this exposure so they begin working through it before, we send them to practicum, and it's a little bit higher stakes. They're dealing with, a lot of times very real clients who, at least in the way we do it, are often at a practice, an agency, and they're paying for these services. So there was that piece of it. And then the other is sort of as a teaching thing. And so the other area I'm looking at to the Google Cardboard is, what's nice is you can design these so that you can almost have essentially a bring your own device mentality. And so one of the areas I want to continue to explore, and sharing this with anybody who also wants to dive into it, is how does this look in a classroom interaction? And so, a Google Cardboard box is maybe $10, $20 at the most. And most students have some kind of smartphone device these days where I'm interested in learning more about how we create this as a group interaction versus just a lab-based immersive experience. And what would happen if we, brought a bunch of cardboard boxes to the classroom and the students all watched the case together, and the types of conversations we could have. And depending on the content you're trying to convey, in what ways can we develop skills conversations around it, just emotional reactivity, assessing nonverbals. Because again, for me, I don't think, I hear this all the time in practicum. I was just supervising students last week I didn't realize how hard this was. Not intellectually, but a lot of, how do I go home and deal with my family after having to sit through multiple trauma narratives. And so there's a lot of connectivity into that for me in terms of vicarious trauma. How do we help students sort of develop the skill set earlier on to also just sort of deal with the difficult task of being a counselor? So that's kind of where I am with it. I know for me personally, one of the things this just last 18 months, a lot of the research is slowed down because everything's been shut down. And so to get people to actually come in to sit under a headset has been slowed down with some of the COVID stuff. So I'm hoping as things start to kind of regain traction, we can get more in and try and incentivize that. So, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, Dr. Wilkinson, thank you for that. And speaking of that, being shut down with COVID and not being able to get into, a facility or a VR lab, we do have a question in the chat box about recommendations or tips for using the micro cases for students who are in an online program, because there's not access to, a VR lab. But I think you've talked a little bit about that with Google Cardboard and how accessible it is. But if you wanted to respond to that along with our other panelists.
Yeah, I can start. I would say it's a great question, and I would be very, I have so many ideas. Let me see if I can sort through. Where I think there's also a lot of potential is thinking through, now that post-COVID, we've had so much exposure to telehealth, telemental health, being on Zoom. It would be a very interesting area to learn more about, of where all this sort of comes together too. And I think it's a really good question. My initial response is, you could do a lot of different things. The easiest route is using a phone. Like, I take the Google Cardboard home. My kids know I have access to VR content, and that'll be a thing they do now, is they'll bring it and look and want to watch videos. There's a lot of fun stuff. They like to virtually ride roller coasters. And I say all that because it's a pretty easy thing that I think you could walk through with somebody if you set up a synchronous type of conference call to, watch in real time. But that would be a very interesting thing to know more about, to study, to sort of, what would that impact be? But I think, especially with like a Mindscape Commons, you can easily access that online and pull down that content on an app on a phone. And so as long as you're web enabled, you can pull that up and recreate those experiences. One of the things I found, just as a recommendation too, if anybody's using this and a Google Cardboard, I've done two things. One, I find it to be a more immersive experience if I can somehow block out the light in the cracks, because I think sometimes that makes this cognitive break that pulls away. And I also find that using headphones can help drown out that background noise. And so I think I would set up some parameters if I was working with somebody in an online context. These Google Cardboards are really accessible. You can order them online. You can go and purchase them at a local electronics store. They're fairly inexpensive to just place a phone in, and and getting it all set up is fairly intuitive, I found.
I'm on mute, sorry about that. I was just gonna showcase, this is, I think this cost maybe $5 or $10. It's not cardboard, but it's plastic, but it pops out. And this is a case where you'd slip your phone in and look through. It doesn't block out all the light like you were talking about, Dr. Wilkinson. So there are slightly more expensive. This was maybe $20 or $25 where you can slip it in and then the light is blocked out, and then wearing headphones will help with that experience. Those are two examples I have in my office.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate, Dr. Wilkinson, you sharing that idea of, how do we make it more immersive? How do we and that resonates. That's actually reflective of the neuroimaging literature. If you looked into the neuroimaging literature around people watching TV, for example, that 2D experience of I know that I'm sitting in a room and I know that I'm watching something and it's sort of it's at a distance from me. There's not a whole lot of brain activity that happens at that time. That's why educational TV back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s was supposed to be this revolution. And people really struggled to find a lot of evidence neuropsychologically that kids were learning a lot, because it tends to flatten out the response. Whereas if you neuroimage somebody, listening to a radio program, there's more that's required of the brain to sort of produce those experiences. While you could argue then that, well, this immersive experience, maybe it's even less than TV. In fact, it's just the opposite. When it's truly immersive, when we're able to block out that outside world and we are having that experience that's truly immersive, the brain imaging explodes. And when you think about the neuropsychological aspects of learning and that fast to slow progression, it's about cognitive breadcrumbs. It's about how much of the brain can you get involved. And what I love about the immersive experiences and Dr. Wilkinson's research is we're creating those experiences where people are using sort of that whole brain learning, that whole brain imaging. And Dr. Dawson has done some publishing in that area over the years. And so I want to open this up to him as well, because he's done some really interesting things with cardboard and, all of those other, and it has worked through some of that COVID stuff as well. But it strikes me that we're onto something here, I think, from a neuropsychological and a learning standpoint.
And I'll add we had, again, school medicine, our lab actually never closed, and COVID, we actually had it, we're running full time because, again, we do applications with regular training, both counselors as well as medical staff around, and also a lot of research. One of the things we do is we do a lot of sanitation there, a lot of that. I will say that the cardboard is a really good idea in some ways. The thing I don't like about cardboard is, unfortunately, is the pixelation and how you hear about people who have video nauseous and from using the experience and have a negative experience from it. And so, but the immersion is awesome. One of the things we have at our university is literally every class that we have within the again, CACREP curriculum has basically a virtual reality. Virtual reality, remember, is a tool. It's not a godsend. And I've been doing this for a long time. And it's a tool. So every class, a faculty member can go back to Dr. Walsh and I, what we pulled up, and they can put their students in a lot of different experiences. We're fortunate. We have a lot of basically, we can run up to 13 headsets if we need to. But we have the immersion. We have the ones where we put the counseling in, but we also have assessments. I teach basically how to do assessments, both on functional assessments and cognitive assessments with basically virtual reality. When we get to counseling, I teach, again, how to use I am the behaviorist of the group. And so for cognitive behavioral therapy, when we do that, they come in there for counseling too. And not only do they learn counseling right there, but they also learn how to do things from the biofeedback. They learn how to do panic attacks. They learn how to work with this from a therapeutic point of view. And we do biometric data where we're not only just doing the headset, but we gather basically little smartwatches, and we gather the biometric data that we actually can see some evidence based to that. So there's a lot that's going on. It's constantly changing, and I talk too much, so I turn it back to you two.
Yeah, and I think what's exciting about that for me as an educator is, and Dr. Wilkinson mentioned this earlier, how can we create these truly immersive experiences, and how can we help students to navigate those? How am I reacting to this? What is my experience when I hear of a sexual trauma? What is my experience when I hear when I experience a real true anger outburst, and how I respond to that? And that creates those rich conversations. And as I think about learning community and what kind of conversations does that generate, I think that's the generative part that is really exciting for me. As Dr. Wilkinson mentioned, if we brought cardboard into a group, what kind of richer conversations could we have as a result of that? Because fundamentally, what we know is adults learn better when they have experiential content, when they have a role in designing their own experiences, and when they're able to share their experiences and learn from others. Those are really well documented in the learning literature. And I think we can utilize technology, as Dr. Dawson said, intentionally, right? It's not a be all and end all, but we can do it, sort of as a way to add to experience. And so, Dr. Wilkinson, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I'm thinking two things. I think I myself have been, to the original point, surprised exactly how immersive it can get by seeing the students' reactions. I mean, my own reactions. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, the first time I put on this one little video that was like these robots coming after you, and I remember I was all by myself in the lab, and there was like this robot that jumped out, and I literally fell to the floor because it just and so I think that is, to that second point of, that is also where I'm at, is it's I want to get this going enough that it moves past just the novelty of how neat and cool it is, because I do see it as a very interesting tool and a pedagogical tool where we can start creating more rich conversations with students about not just how would you work with this client, still a great question, right? What symptoms are you seeing that we need to assess? A great question, but also what are you feeling and noticing about yourself? Because I do think too, at least from my own experience from teaching, is that I find that students also have in their mind, you've all probably been there too. It's like, well, I was told I'm a good listener and I'm going to be good at this. And it creates, I think, this myth that in order to do this well, you're going to be unmoved or above, the trauma response or dealing with suicide. And there's still times when doing this work is hard. I still see clients, and I've had multiple sessions last year. It was like, this is hard, And so I think I want students to, for me, realize that more of, okay, it's okay to have your own emotional reaction. You can still be useful. You can still be there. And this kind of creates an opportunity to sort of talk through that in a structured learning environment. But also, if we started to also bring that more into the classroom context, I would almost certainly predict that most of the peers would respond in kind of, okay, yeah, I feel things too. Because I've just seen it so much at the practicum and internship stage. It's in some ways trying to create that experience early on to also give more time to connect that with their development.
Yeah. And I want to add, if it's possible, again, the experience is great, but tools, and where I got started in this was back with BF Skinner learning models. And so my Apple IIes, when I would start programming, it was everything based off of that. Where I see these are tools, the big exciting part is bringing this in the classroom. And the reason why we have this in every classroom available is hopefully get these students to start to brainstorming themselves how to do it. we already know, because what we do with palliative care, what we do, that we can put these headsets on and person's pain level goes down. We know that person's right there. We can take persons through, if I have a person with autism right there, the research coming out of Kentucky is fantastic on, again, how quick someone goes, and you can get someone from calm without versus calm within virtual reality. I love, again, assessment is my thing right there, and on some of the things. And so we were working with some veterans, and the veteran had one of the ones that was giving me a very low range of motion. And by chance, my researcher that I work with, he was put him on it, and he was working with him, and I watched him, and then he was doing all these full extensions, and I just looked over and I said, "Was he on?" And he goes, "He chose the climbing wall." And this is a person they've never seen do that before. Again, because of what the brain does, how we see it. And so therapeutically, it starts to connect with us. So therapeutic, we looked and said, okay, if that does it that way, then how can we add it here to the component? How do we can add it to the counseling component? How can we add it to the training component? How can we add it to every little part of it? But on the other part that I'll say is, I'm also cautious because of that. It's technology. Technology by itself has a lot of problems. Technology itself, there's a lot of barriers in it. There's a lot of hazards, and there's really a lot of ethical components that we have to talk about. And so where the pedagogy, the immersion, the all of this, we also have to really be very clear looking at the ethics. So.
And Dr. Dawson, did you want to, that's a great lead in. I'm thinking of all of the work that our tremendous GAs so far have done. And do you want to talk about how you utilize the GAs in the lab, and to operate safely, to ease people in and out of experiences, to ensure their safety?
Yeah, we have actually we work with a number of, we have a number of different headsets. We have a variety of headsets. We have, you could be sitting, you could be standing. And what we have is some really safe protocols. There's safety protocols. And so the first thing, obviously, is all the GAs know how to disinfect everything and thoroughly make sure everything disinfected. And then when the person comes in, we actually do also, same thing that Dr. Wilkinson does. We have a orientation where they can just get used to it. We usually talk to them about it, what they're going to be, what it's going to feel like first. We have some things, again, if they want to wear gloves, they can wear gloves, latex gloves, a lot of pros. Once they're in there, the GA is always required, and we do one-on-one, that we never leave someone alone. And the GA is literally at a moment's notice right there. And so their job is they notice the person's feeling like, or Dr. Wilkinson, leaning too far forward, they're going to be there to catch them just in case, because they may lose their balance. They're always going to be that safety protocol. They're also going to be checking in with them. How are they doing? How are you there? And parts of that, we want to combat and make it a pleasant experience. The person will usually, on our very first experience, we allow no more than 20 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes is usually our maximum. And then we take the person off, we give an orientation, we kind of, again, wipe things out, let them kind of sit there, get oriented to the time and place. And then we see how they are, and then may put them back in. It's safety, hygiene, and caution is throughout. And that's just something that I've learned over the years of, again, working with people and working with so many persons in this perspective, that you never know who's going to be the person that throws their arm out and hits a wall and breaks a finger, or who's going to be the person who suddenly has a traumatic experience or suddenly gets very sick, and how to deal with it. And so having someone who's trained in that, we can take it and make it a positive experience instead of a negative experience. Although the one hit the wall, I will say this is, I will say I was at fault with that one. And that one was I was working with a 16-year-old male who I thought knew technology, and this person was so new to technology, and we were actually using it as a reward system for some other things they were doing. And he was actually using like a Jurassic Park, and he was freaking out going, "This is so real, this is so real, this is so real." And then he put his hand out, and I took my eyes off for a second, and his hand hit the wall, and I said, "Yeah, you can actually feel them."
Yeah, and I think that's well said. There's actually some research, an article came out in 2020 that talked about some of the clinical uses and a number of the risks that Dr. Dawson described, kind of dysregulation coming back into the environment. Motion sickness is a potential. And there's a number of others that Dr. Dawson mentioned. Having somebody facilitate that experience, bring people gently into and out of those experiences, have them re-regulate to the environment. Those are all important ethical and safety concerns that that we can account for, and we know. And I'm happy to share that article with you if you're interested. We've kind of learned through experience that those are issues, and that way we can do the things that Dr. Wilkinson described, and we can have people have these be really, really rich experiences, and really experiences that we can then process as a larger group. And I think that can be really effective. Dr. Wilkinson, anything you wanted to add to that?
Not a whole lot. I agree. I mean, we've addressed a lot of the similar things through our experience here with just ensuring the students are aware what's about to happen. If you have to rule out if anybody is not going to be a medical fit, letting them know, what that's going to feel like. Even to making sure, we help them sometimes put the headset on. So just getting permission, like, all right, well, we're going to touch your head now. Just some straightforward stuff. But we also disinfect everything and do a debriefing with them too, to kind of reorient as well. I think that's important. Yeah, I agree. Also limiting the amount, because it can do some eye strain, and sometimes the glasses. I know I try to do mine in this.
I just wanted to chime in and say we're about 4 minutes to 1 o'clock Eastern time. And so if there are any other questions you'd like to put in the chat box right now, please do so. We have just a few more minutes. I will say that we will be sending, following up by email, a link of the recording today. A link to, somebody asked about links to the headsets that I showcased here. I'll just send you a link. There are many options, but I've tried out these two I've got an Oculus as well, but I'll send out links there. And then some links to the journal articles that Dr. Walsh mentioned. Also, Dr. Wilkinson, I'd love to send out the link to the journal article on your earlier findings with the micro cases, if that's okay. And that's all open access. And then if we can include the panelists' emails, I know some people reached out to me privately and just asked if they could contact you directly. So I don't know if you want to speak to that.
That's fine for me.
Absolutely, more than welcome to contact us. Yep.
Yeah, and I'll say that our virtual reality center is a collaborative center, and so we work with people from all over the nation, local there stuff, and we love partnerships and we love working with people.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, I think with that, any other closing remarks from the three panelists?
No, thanks so much for joining us. This was great and really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, and it's outstanding. In the future, we'll be doing this all virtually, by the way, and then you'll see our avatars and we'll all see each other and in closed session. But
Great. Well, I just, on behalf of Coherent Digital and Mindscape Commons, I do want to just thank Drs. Wilkinson, Walsh, and Dawson for being here. This was a wonderful conversation. We really appreciate your time and talents, and looking forward to future conversations.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks everybody for attending, and thanks for the thanks.